Okay, so we are out here at Caesarea. This is a port town that was actually built by Herod the Great. Herod the Great was known as Herod the Great because he was a great builder, not necessarily because he was a great guy. But this right behind me is actually a spot where it is thought that it may have been the place of hearing when Paul in the book of Acts was actually tried by Agrippa and Festus. And so this may very well, they're thinking that this may be the place where he was heard, and he was actually tried there, and then later, several years later, he was actually executed. And so this is a great spot. You can see there are many buildings that they've built up here. This port had about 700 ships at one time. It was demolished and kind of ruined, but they've uncovered a lot of the ruins here, so it's a great spot to see in Israel. Okay, this is another piece to Caesarea and the port town that Herod the Great built. As you can see, we're in the theater right here, so there would have been a theater. There's a hippodrome over across the way that they would do chariot races, things like that. This is also, if you'll note, where they brought Peter actually up here to preach the gospel to a Gentile named Cornelius, a centurion. And so this was a place that was noted for, really realizing that the gospel was going to go out to the Gentiles. Now remember when Jesus said, I want you to take the gospel out to all nations, and he planned for it to go to all nations, tribes, and tongues. It was first to the Jews, now it's going out to the Gentiles, and you can see the Mediterranean would have been a huge port for the gospel to go and be spread abroad. So this is a pretty exciting little spot that was used to spread the gospel to all nations. Okay, so right now we are at the top of Mount Carmel, and this is the site of actually quite a few biblical events in history. And so if you'll recall the event with Elijah and the prophets of Baal and Jezebel, Jezebel wanted to prove that the prophets of Baal were the actual prophets and that their God was God. And Elijah chose to demonstrate through God's power that his God was the one true God. And remember, we only have one true God. And so it was here that that showdown occurred, where the Lord sent fire from heaven and proved to everybody that he is the one true God that they should be worshiping. So that's one thing here. And also you're going to notice behind me is the Valley of Jezreel that you can see here from Mount Carmel. It is an amazing panoramic view, and you can just imagine at the end of the age the battle that will be fought here where Christ comes and conquers with his people. And so you can see a lot here, lots of biblical significance and just lots of beauty here as well. More to come. Okay, so today we are at Tel Dan, and right here behind me is actually, this was unearthed several years ago. It is the altar of Jeroboam. So if you remember back to your Old Testament Bible history, Jeroboam was the ruler in the north when the kingdom split. Okay, so Jeroboam and 10 tribes went to the north, and the rest stayed in Judah. Now, Jeroboam made a big mistake. God had promised him that if he followed God's law and if he was staying true to God, that God would bless him and make him like the house of David. Well, unfortunately, Jeroboam let fear get in. And so what he did is right here in Dan, remember he was to the north, right here in Dan, he built an altar, and on this altar, he placed golden calves and stated, hey, this is where you guys are going to worship. Now, what was the problem with this? Well, as we all know, the actual house of the Lord was in Jerusalem at this time. And that was where the people were said to go. They needed to go to Jerusalem to worship there. And so by Jeroboam doing this, he was certainly saying, I'm not following the Lord. I'm setting up these false altars. And so Dan was one of the locations of one of those altars. They were in Bethel and Dan. And so right here, we have, you can see right behind me, the altar that they have unearthed. Now the metal pieces are actually recreated, but this is where that was, and this is Tel Dan. And so a great place to just kind of figure out some of these things and to see some archaeological discovery that you don't get just anywhere. So we'll tell you more at our next site. Okay, so right now we are in Caesarea Philippi. So this is actually a region that's really known for pagan idolatry. There's actually an area up there which was a sacrificial spot for the god Pan. So there are a lot of godless traditions that have happened here in this area. So it's funny that Jesus, our Lord, would choose this area to bring his disciples and really unveil himself as the Messiah to them in this place. So note that we have this theme of all of these dead gods are around this region. These gods that have no power, and yet the God of all creation, the one true God, reveals himself as the Son who is going to come and save his people right here. So this is actually, you read in Matthew 16, actually verse 13 says that they came to Caesarea Philippi here, the disciples and Jesus, and this is where Jesus actually asks Peter, you know, who do they say that I am? And it is here, they said, well, some say John the Baptist, some say, you know, you're one of the prophets, some say you're Elijah, we don't, you know, and he asks Peter specifically, who do you say that I am? And what does Peter say? He confesses him as the Messiah, the Son of the one true living God. So you see this beautiful confession here in this region, and just an amazing spot to actually just take in some of the sights and realize that our God is God of all, and this is where he really unveiled that for his disciples. Okay, so right now we are at the Mount of the Beatitudes, and they call it the Mount of the Beatitudes because there's a proposition that this may have been the spot where Matthew chapter 5 talks about how Jesus brought people up to a mount in order to teach them. So he went through the Beatitudes, 8 Beatitudes, blessed are the meek for they shall inherit the earth, and you've heard all of those. He also goes on to actually interpret the law for them, for he was indeed the fulfillment of the law. So he fulfills it in every way, meaning he obeyed the law perfectly, and he's also able to interpret the law for them. And when he was finished, the people were amazed, and they said, you know, this guy, he speaks as someone who has authority. So this was a very special moment in time, and so it's wonderful to be here in the land and just to think of these stories and just to kind of picture what it must have been like. We're not 100% sure that this is the actual mount, and yet it does fit a lot of the characteristics of the mount that he may have been on. So just a great picture here in Israel. All right, so this afternoon we hiked to the top of Mount Arabel. Now, right behind me, you'll see the beautiful Sea of Galilee. This is a wonderful mountainscape that you can see just about, I mean, you can see about 30 or 40 miles today. It's pretty amazing. The bus comes up here too. So half of us hiked, half of us went on the bus in order to see this glorious view. Now, in Matthew 28, we remember that Jesus tells his disciples to go to a specific mountain, and he points and he kind of points to the fact that he is going to send them out. He gives them the Great Commission, telling them to go and preach the gospel to all nations and to teach them to obey everything that he's commanded them, and surely he will be with us to the end of the age. So that extends to us as his disciples today, that we would bring this message to all nations. And from here you can certainly see how this would have made sense as a possible location for that specific mountain. Okay, so right now we're on the Sea of Galilee. We actually just took a beautiful boat ride, sang some songs, we sang I Love You, Lord, and now you can see the beauty of the Galilee. And so, you know, if you think back to Isaiah 9, Isaiah prophesied that a light would shine in Galilee, and this is where we saw our Lord come and shine his light in Galilee. And so it's just an amazing spot of so many stories that we hear in the Bible. Jesus walking on water with the Lord providing fish for the disciples. So many things that go on here, and we'll have a few more stories to come. Okay, so right now we are in the town of Capernaum. This is actually the town that Jesus lived in, and he actually may have lived right behind me. We don't know exactly which house might have been his, but there's houses behind me that you can see they've unearthed. There's also a synagogue, the base foundation of a synagogue that Jesus taught in. And so it's just amazing to be here in the town that he was shining his light here in Galilee. They also have uncovered a rock here that actually has Christos and Petros, Peter, on the rock in one of the houses. And so it is thought that that could possibly be Peter's house, maybe his mother-in-law's house, something like that. So lots of history here, lots of amazing ways to see the light of Jesus that shone here. Okay, so right now we are in En Gedi. This is one of my favorite places in Israel. You're gonna see the ibex, the young goats that are running around. We've seen the hyrax, the little kind of furball things. And right here is David's waterfall. So David, remember when he was fleeing from Saul because Saul was seeking his life, he came to En Gedi, the fountain of the young goat. And so you can imagine David being here in this scene as he wrote many of the Psalms, can't you? So David and Saul both hiding in caves. There are several caves around here. Obviously, we don't know which one they were hiding in, but this is a great scene to just kind of picture those times where David was calling out to the Lord in the Psalms and seeking the Lord to perform an act. And so just a great moment here in En Gedi.
Or go in and come out.
So today we are in the ancient city of Qumran, and you may have heard of Qumran before because just a few years back, the Dead Sea Scrolls came to Minnesota and visited us at the Science Museum. So you heard Qumran connected with those Dead Sea Scrolls because I believe it was 1947. There were some Bedouin shepherds who actually were just going to find their sheep, were throwing some stones into the caves looking for sheep, and heard some pottery break, and all of a sudden they look inside and they find these scrolls. Well, so they sold them again, and suddenly the government got a hold of them and realized there were actual biblical writings. There were ancient writings from this town. It was a town where the Essenes, a sect of Jewish religious folks, had moved over here too. And so obviously these Dead Sea Scrolls now are in the hands of the government, but this is right where they found them, and there's actually the ancient city here, so you can see the whole thing when you come to Qumran. All right, right now we have just climbed through the Zin Canyon. So you might remember the wilderness of Zin, where the Israelites actually traveled for 40 years wandering in the desert, and they complained and they grumbled, and yet the Lord was providing for them. They just weren't very appreciative of it. So I can see how this might be quite the traverse. We just climbed up the face of this area here, and it was a little bit scary noticing the fall ability. No, nobody fell. We're all good. But yes, this is where they were, wilderness wanderings. Okay, so right now we are actually below the ground that we see when we walk out to the western wall. These are the original walls from Herod's temple. And so we remember the first temple was demolished. Herod the Great, the master builder, chose to build huge walls up to the temple. Now over the years, these have been covered up by houses because of course civilization was built up above each other and above each other. So the actual ground level will show you out to the Western Wall that we see today. But right now you can walk underground, under what we see the ground as today, and see the original walls of that second temple that Herod built. It took about 75 years for them to build that temple. More to come on this one. Okay, so we passed the Western Walls and now we're walking along an aqueduct. So this would bring water to the city. It's really cool in here to see the rock formations and how this all looks now, and the fact that you can actually walk through it when you come to Jerusalem. Okay, so we saw the tunnels beneath the wall, the original walls. And right behind me here, you can see the Western Wall that we are actually able to go and view today. And so the Western Wall, it's significant of the Western Wall of the Temple Mount. And so the Temple Mount is right there on top. There's a Muslim shrine currently there on top of the mount. And you can see the bridge to get up there. Now, the actual Western Wall is divided into two sides. There's a women's side and a men's side. There's also a study area inside. And so the women and the men go to the Western Wall to pray. Oftentimes they're praying for the return of, or for the Messiah to come. Remember that most Jewish people do not believe that the Messiah has come, that Jesus was the Messiah. They reject that notion, and they're still praying that this Messiah would come. So that's what they're doing, and they put little pieces of paper into the wall with their prayers on there sometimes, and it's a very sacred spot for the Jewish people. Of course, we couldn't come down to the Dead Sea region without giving you a shot of a morning at the Dead Sea. Nighttime is beautiful here. Morning time is really beautiful here. You can see the sun is starting to peek out this morning as we get ready to actually move on to our next site. Now, the Dead Sea is also known in the Bible as the Salt Sea, and it will not always be the Salt Sea. Right now, there is no life in the Dead Sea. Nothing can live in there. If you go in the Dead Sea, you can't put your face under, you can't do anything. You can just kind of float there, and you've probably seen pictures of that. So it's kind of an amazing phenomenon with all the minerals and salt in the sea. But one day God is going to renew the sea and life will come back to it. So we look forward to that day when he returns and does that miraculous work. All right, well, right now we are at the Garden of Gethsemane, and this is the place where Jesus came and petitioned with his Father 3 times that he might escape this fate of going to the cross and having to experience that. And yet, what do we find? Not my will, but thy will be done, which is such a great just message for all of us here. Behind me, you can actually see some of the olive trees. Gethsemane means olive press, and so you can see the olive trees. Some of them, they think that the roots may actually date all the way back to when Christ was actually here, and so it's kind of an amazing thing to just think about him being here, him praying to the Father, and yet coming to the conclusion, not my will, but thy will be done.